We're here at the World Food Prize. How important or how big a concern is global hunger?
Global hunger is a huge concern. And if your question implies the question of whether we can beat hunger, the answer is yes. We can beat hunger today for today's population and future populations. If everybody is talking about 9 billion people by 2050, as a matter of fact, it is going to be by 2050 potentially more like 12 billion people if we take into account the changing dietary preferences that people bring with them as their incomes grow.
Right.
So the food production challenge is major. If we do the right things, we can solve it, however, and we can solve it in environmentally sustainable ways.
You seem pretty confident.
I'm confident because I see what's possible on the ground. For example, our foundation supports projects in South Asia and in Sub-Saharan Africa that work with farmers on the ground in their communities by bringing improved technology to them, improved agricultural practices, better agronomy, and so on. And I can tell you, Clinton, it takes not 10 years to make a difference. It takes one cropping season, appropriately framed and supported. So what is it that farmers want, and what is it that needs to be facilitated? Always three things: technology, agricultural services, and access to markets.
How do we grow the progress we've made so far? How do we continue to make progress and faster?
Actually, we have to make much faster progress than we have been making in the last 25 years or so. So, for example, the growth of grain yields in the last 25 years has been negative. We're still growing annually a little bit more in terms of productivity, but at a declining rate. The rate is now down to about the level of world population growth. But world population is not only growing, it's also getting richer. So there is not resilience and reserves in the global food system to take into account and to produce more so that we can take into account what I call additions to demand that are derived from income, as opposed to additions to demand that come from population growth. So we need to accelerate yield growth in massive ways, and at the same time in ways that are environmentally sustainable.
What would make a sustainable system? It's kind of a big question, I know.
It's a big
But
question.
it's important that it's sustainable, right?
It is absolutely important because we have a situation of natural resource degradation globally, not so much necessarily in the temperate zones, more in the tropical areas, in semi-arid areas that are more fragile. But there's an absolute need for us to intensify agriculture in ways that are taking care of natural resources, that use land and water wisely. And the way to do it is in terms of yield, really. We've got to think about yield per unit of land, yield per unit of water that is being used, and so on. And so it's really, at some level, about cutting waste in agriculture, because there's a lot of agrochemicals, fertilizer, water that is being wasted. And land is being wasted. If you have land where you produce a ton of grain per hectare, for example, where you could produce 3, 4, or 5 tons on that same amount of land. So that to me tells me that land is wasted. And what's worse is we're also wasting people. Why? Because of the low labor productivity in agriculture, which directly translates into poverty, right? So this is about wasting people too. So we've got to intensify through technology, by bringing the right kind of services, including extension, for example, ag extension to the farmer, and always ensuring access to markets at the same time.
Why is this important for Syngenta? How does this help all of us?
This is, well, Syngenta is an input, the company is an input supplier. It's a crop science company, invests a lot of money in research, and develops, for example, improved seed with the traits that are needed, whether it be, I don't know, drought tolerance, bug resistance, the various traits that should be embodied in seed. That's a very important, actually, maybe the most important contribution to cutting into the yield, I'm trying to find the right word, the yield gap
Right.
Yeah? Cutting into you want to reduce that yield gap. So Syngenta is a provider of technology. Now the Syngenta Foundation, which I run, which is an entity that's independent of Syngenta Corporation, our work is to bring technology and better agronomy to what I call the lower end of the market, meaning smaller farmers. Pre-commercial farmers is a term that I often use.
And why the focus on the smaller farmers?
The world is full of small farmers. In the developing part of the world, or sometimes the emerging markets is another name that is being used. Basically, agriculture is made up of small farmers. So you got lots of small operations. And so then the question is, how can we reach millions and millions of small farmers? That is really the question. And there are methods to go about it. Some of them we're trying to put into practice.
Very good. One last question. You think we can get there?
I think we can get there. I think we can get there, but it requires a concerted effort. It requires an acceptance of technology, science and technology, and it requires services such as agricultural credit, crop insurance, agricultural extension, and so on that need to be delivered. And how? So then the big question is, of course, how to deliver. And oftentimes, public-private partnerships may be needed as a tool to scale up and bring those services to the farm population.